protozoans are motile, right? And I explained some bicilia, right? Flagella or pseudopodia, basically false feet, okay? But a subgroup, bless you, called the apicoplexamins, these guys are non-motile acidols. So these guys will be your Plasmodium species. So Plasmodium as an adult is not motile. It's not. So these are the guys, as adults, cannot move around. The other ones can. All right. Where can you find them? Most of them require moist environments. So usually many of them live in either freshwater ponds or streams and lakes or even in the ocean. Protozoans are critical members of zooplankton. Not just plankton, zooplankton. Because there's two types of plankton. First of all, let me back up. Do you know what plankton is? Okay, great. I'm glad you said that, because if you didn't, I can't tell you, right? I'm going to tell you exactly what plankton is. Plankton is basically found in the ocean, and it's basically part of the food chain. In other words, it's basically the stuff that floats on the top of the ocean, and fish come and eat it. Whales eat it. Some whales only eat plankton. So it's basically microorganisms that just float on the top of the ocean. They just chill on the top. They're floating. And other fish or mammals like whales eat them. And some whales, as big as they are, only eat plankton. Now there's two types of plankton, okay? Zooplankton and photoplankton. So zooplankton is what? Animal, right? Animal. So the protozoans make up zooplankton, okay? Because you can have algae, right, doing the same thing. Algae also float on the top of the ocean, but at photoplankton, meaning light. So we do. Now others, if they're not exactly in the water, they still have to be in a moist environment. So they can be in the soil or beach sand or decaying organic material as long as it's moist. And very few of them, very few are pathogens, very few. Now let's talk about their morphology, okay? In terms of that, many different shapes, okay? So very diverse. Some have two nuclei, okay? So you have a cell that has two nuclei. Now sometimes the nuclei are not exactly the same. In other words, one is really big and one's really small. So if you have one big nucleus, that's the macronucleus. Usually, the macronucleus is the one that's in charge, right? Like the regular nucleus, it maintains everything, right? Metabolism, okay, cell division, etc., etc. So the macronucleus maintains the cell's activities, just like a regular nucleus would, okay? This is called the macronucleus because it's big. Now, the micronucleus is smaller, and usually it will be used to do things like genetic recombination. And also, if the protozoan can do sexual reproduction in the form of conjugation, I'll talk about that. If they can do conjugation, they're using the micronucleus to do conjugation, just like bacteria would, okay? And you'll see a picture of that. So some protozoans can do sexual reproduction in the form of conjugation. If they do, they use the micronucleus for that process. The macronucleus is used for asexual reproduction, okay? That's the macronucleus. Micronucleus, sexual reproduction in the form of conjugation. Now, these protozoans also vary in the numbers and kinds of mitochondria they have, so some of them don't even have mitochondria, and some have many. So some protozoans don't have them altogether. Some have contractile vacuoles. You see that in the next picture? In other words, let me back up, okay? I said most live in what? Fresh water environments, correct? Most live where? Ponds, streams, and lakes. Fresh water, correct? Now, if they're in fresh water and they don't have cell walls, they have an issue, makes sense? What's their issue? They take in water, makes sense, which means if they don't have a mechanism of getting rid of that water, what will happen to them? They will explode, makes sense? Right, that's, what? I can't talk today. I'm just tired. They explode. So, they have contractile vacuoles to get rid of excess water. And they're called contractile because they open and they close, literally. They open, they close. They open and they close. When they open, they take in water, right? When they close, they get rid of water. Now, all of them produce trophozoites. Now, trophozoites are the active feeding stage of the protozoan. So this trophozoite, that's the active feeding stage of the protozoan. And if they're in the resting phase, okay, that's just the cyst. So the cyst is the resting stage, the non-active stage, the non-feeding stage of this protozoan. If they're actively feeding, that's the trophozoite. Trophozoite. Now real quick, this guy is paramecium. You can't tell, but you see those hairs? That's all the cilia surrounding this paramecium. Now, it has two contractile vacuoles. They look like stars, correct? This one is closed. That one is open, makes sense? So the open vacuole contains water. The closed vacuole gets rid of the excess water. Why? Because these guys live what? In fresh water environments. And if they don't do that, they will explode. Now, how do they eat? Okay, protozoans, if this makes sense to you, I said their name means what? First, animal. Okay. Animals are what? Heterotrophic, meaning you got to go out and find your food. So these guys also have to what? Go out and find their food. Some of them can get their food by phagocytizing bacteria, eating, decaying, organic matter, or they can eat other protozoans, so they eat each other. Or if they're a pathogen, they basically eat the tissues of their host. Okay, if they're a pathogen.
Is that sort of like methanogen? Not, I mean.
No. Methanogens?
Consuming other organics?
No. Methanogens, okay, they actually make their own food. They basically take it.
Not consuming food.
No. Now, some of them can actually absorb nutrients right from the water. It's absorbed right on in. Now, two of them, they actually used to be placed in the algae group. Okay, so these dinoflagellates and these euglenoids, they used to be put in the algal group, which tells you what? So basically, if they used to be called algae, what must they do? Photosynthesis. So nowadays, these guys, based on molecular data, based on DNA, based on RNA, they're now placed with the protozoans. These guys can do photosynthesis, okay? Because they used to be with the algae, got it? All right. Reproduction. Now, most reproduce asexually only. Okay? If they do, it's a type of binary fission, but I don't like that because it's really mitosis, okay? Only prokaryotes have what? Circular chromosomes. Makes sense? Only prokaryotes have that. All eukaryotes have sticks, okay? Which means you got to move the sticks around. Now, in this case, if they're talking about binary fission, they're talking about how the one cell goes into two. But if we're talking about how the chromosomes move around, it's still mitosis. All eukaryotes have stick chromosomes. Only prokaryotes have this, got it? Or they do schizogeny. We talked about that earlier. And few can do sexual reproduction. If they do, they gotta make gametes, right? So they gotta do meiosis to get to their gametes. And of course, those gametes then fuse together, right? Just like in humans, to form the diploid zygote. Diploid means what? Two copies of the chromosome. Now usually, these guys as adults are haploid. I said that, right? Usually as adults they are haploid, which means if they have a diploid zygote, they got to do meiosis to make them back to haploid again. Makes sense? Okay. Now, some of them, right, if you're doing sexual reproduction, they do conjugation. Now, unlike with the bacterial conjugation, there are no tubes, there are no sex pili immediately, okay? In other words, the two protozoans will just meet together, they just come together, and they exchange your DNA. Now, as I just said, the recent classification is no longer based on their movement. The recent classification of your protozoans is based on molecular data. It's basically based on their RNA. This is trivial. It's basically just say based on RNA. Okay. Similarities in the RNA will tell you where they belong in terms of who's in this group and who's in that. That's all you need to know about that. Okay. Using this scheme, we now have 6 classifications, so 6 taxa. Now, am I going to hold you to their names? I am not. But what I will hold you to is some of them will pull out some members, right? And we'll talk about those members. And those members that we pull out, those guys you need to know. Make sense? Just know their name. And what disease they cause. In terms of what their taxon name is, I don't even remember that because this is recent. Okay, this is up-to-date stuff. Usually, they're placed into little groups based on cilia, right, flagella, pseudopods, or nothing at all. So all this is really new. I'm not going to hold you to the new classification, but I will hold you to anybody we pull out. That's what you need to worry about. Okay, like this one. Okay, so if you back up, where does he go in the chart? That guy is right here, trichomonas. Okay, trichomonas. Why is this guy important? Trichomonas basically causes STDs. Okay, usually some women have it already. It lives in the vagina. Now, usually the vagina is very acidic because you've got lactobacilli in there. That was last chapter, correct? You've got lactobacilli in the vagina. Now, if they're lactobacilli, they're basically fermenting foods and they're producing acid. And if you make acid, what happens to the pH?
Oops.
It goes down, right? If you make acid, pH goes down. And that keeps things like yeast from growing in there and also protozoans like this guy. Now, it is an STD, so you can get it through unprotected sex. Okay, and if you do, guess what you got? It's called trick. You heard of that? Trick. So it's a type of STD caused by this protozoan. It lives in basically lower pH vaginas. Okay? Now, if males have it, they're asymptomatic, meaning they don't have any symptoms. Okay? But if females get it, you know if you have it. Okay, you just feel uncomfortable. Got to get my picture? Okay, you just won't feel right. Okay. Now this guy, okay, this name I don't care about, but know his name. Giardia, okay, that's another protozoan. He actually has 2 nuclei. So these guys, they're not eyes. See this? Those aren't eyes. Those are 2 nuclei. But even though he has 2 nuclei, he doesn't have mitochondria. He has no Golgi bodies, no peroxisomes, meaning all these basic organelles he doesn't have, but 2 nuclei. He also has flagella. Now this guy causes diarrhea. Now here, he's actively feeding, right? The trophozoite, okay? This side here is the trophozoite. This guy is the cyst. So usually you get this guy when you're going out camping, for example. You drink some water and you think you boiled it enough, right? That cyst can resist boiling, makes sense. You drink that water, and if these guys are in there, they get into your system. Yeah, they kind of wake up in your small intestine. So by the time they get to your small intestine, that's when they realize, okay, we're in a nice environment, let's kind of wake up and get to that stage. So you got that. Basically, it causes very severe diarrhea. You won't die from it, but you got to get some help. Because you got to take some medicine to kill that guy. Iodine, not the cyst though. Not the cyst, no. No. So I would just take your own water if you're going to get it. All right, take your own water. All right. Now these 2 guys, okay, both of these guys have flagella too. Now this guy is Euglena. Now Euglena used to be put with the algae. Do you see how he's colored green there? They made him green for a reason, right? He has chlorophyll. In other words, he has chlorophyll A and B. Now chlorophyll A and B, they're both green. And Euglena is actually green. It's pretty cool to look at under the microscope. He also has an eye spot used for phototaxis, meaning he can use the light to direct his movement. Makes sense? Like your eyes do, so it's called the eye spot. And it looks red. So you can actually see that on Euglena under the microscope. Now, unlike algae, okay, so those are similarities in terms of why it's like an alga. Basically, it has chlorophyll, which means it can do what again? Photosynthesis. That's where we stop, okay? That's the only similarity Euglena has with algae. It's green. Okay? Now, here's the deal. This guy does not have a cell wall. All the other algae do. So if this guy has no cell wall, Euglena has 2 ways of eating. It can do photosynthesis, right? Or it can absorb nutrients from the environment. Now, algae don't do that. Algae, if they're algae, they just do photosynthesis. This guy can literally absorb nutrients from the environment, so he can be like a chemoheterotroph, eating food from the environment. So he's more similar to like a protozoan. Also, he can actually move like an amoeboid movement, meaning he can contract his body, do this with his body. So like an amoeboid movement, sort of like protozoans can do. It's called euglenoid movement. It moves like an inchworm. So if you understand how inchworms move, right? That's how this guy can also move. Now, yes, he has a flagellum. In fact, he has two of them. Okay? There's one long flagellum that you can actually see. Okay? And there's one more guy, a short flagellum, that you can barely see. It has two flagellum. And it can actually use the long flagellum to move around. But if it wants, it can do the euglenoid movement where it basically does this with its body. Contracts, expands, like an inchworm would do. Got it? Now this guy here, okay, that's trypanosoma, okay? Also a flagellate has a flagellum. Now these guys, looks like they're in the blood smear. These guys cause sleeping sicknesses, okay? You got two kinds, all right? Now trypanosoma can cause African sleeping sickness. It's spread by the tsetse fly, or if you're in South America or Central America, it can cause Chagas disease, passed by the kissing bug. Yeah, it's called kissing bug because when they bite you near your mouth. And when they do, they pass to you these lovely trypanosomes. If you're in South America, you got Chagas disease, similar to the African sickness in Africa. They have different vectors. One's a fly, one's a bug. All right. Oh boy. Now, I'm not going to hold you to these up. I think it's pretty cool.
What is that?
Yeah, these are both ciliates. They're protozoans that move by cilia. Makes sense? So back up. These guys move by what? Flagella. Makes sense? Yeah. These guys move by cilia. Now, the cilia can either cover the whole cell or it can be in segments. Now, this guy is actually eating this guy. That's pretty cool. He's eating him.
That's not cool.
It is cool.
It's like kind of a...
No, it's cool. He's eating them up. So I said that protozoans can eat other protozoans. Here's an example of that. This guy is paramecium. This guy is idiom. He's eating this poor guy up. Poor thing. I know. Now this guy, ooh, I think most of you have this in your next lab practice, right? It's an amoeba, another protozoan, moves by amoeboid movement. Okay. These guys cause another type of diarrhea, amoebic dysentery, basically diarrhea. Okay. Now, this is basically a
motility again?
motility, amoeboid movement. Amoeboid movement, okay. Here's an amoeba causes amoebic dysentery. This is a fecal smear. In other words, if you're pooping this guy out, you know, you're going to see him in your poop. That's a fecal smear. Causes amoebic dysentery, basically diarrhea. All right, let's go on to the fungi. Now, all fungi are chemoheterotrophic. Now, we can't say that, right? We cannot say that all protozoans are chemoheterotrophic because I gave you two examples of ones that are photosynthetic, right? Dinoflagellates and euglena. They can do photosynthesis, which means we can't say this for all protozoans, but all fungi, just like you. They have to go out and find their food. Now, they have cell walls. And in their cell walls, they have chitin. Now, chitin is the same polysaccharide found in the exoskeleton of insects. Same deal, except they have it in their cell walls, called chitin. They are non-photosynthetic. That's why they're not plants. They lack chlorophyll because they're not green. And they're related to animals in terms of, you got to go out and find your food. Now, what is the significance of fungi? Why should we care about fungi? Their main purpose in the environment, they are decomposers, okay? Just like bacteria. They work together and they decompose dead things. That's very important because it helps with the recycling of nutrients in the environment. They help plants absorb water and minerals. So some fungi form symbiotic relationships with plant roots. It forms mycorrhizae. I talked about that some time ago. Does that word ring a bell to you? I hope so, because I mentioned it early on. Mycorrhizae is basically fungi living with plant roots. And when they do that, they help the plant to absorb nutrients. In other words, what's the purpose of plant roots, right? Absorb nutrients.
Are they
right?
rhizoids too?
Mycorrhizae. So it's mycorrhizae. If you've got these fungi associated with the plant roots, they basically do what? They help with that process. In other words, if you've got a root going straight down like this, the mycorrhizae will be going out like this, right? It increases the surface area, correct? So you can get nutrients on this side as well as makes sense? Not just what? Straight down. Got it? That was pretty funny. Okay. In terms of what we use fungi to do, we can eat them, right? So some people, not me, I don't like mushrooms. Some people like mushrooms or truffles. Those are fungi. You eat them. Okay? Or you can use them to make food, like blue cheese, for example, or bread, or alcohol. Makes sense? What's that, Katie?
Kimchi.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Soy sauce, okay?
Kombucha tea.
Tea, for example. So you can eat them directly or indirectly in terms of what you're making. Some of them, like penicillium, right? Makes what? Antibiotics. You know that whole deal already, right? Talked about that many, many times before. Some serve very important roles in research. In other words, these are eukaryotes. So if you want to study, for example, biochemical reactions in a eukaryote, you can use fungi. They're similar to you in terms of biochemical reactions, for example. 30% cause disease of plants, animals, and humans. And some can spoil your food. You know this at home, right? Some can spoil your fruit. You leave it out too long, you don't eat it, your pickles, your jams, and your jellies. Even though your jams and jellies, they're pretty safe from bacteria, right? If you keep them long enough, you end up with the mold growing in there. Makes sense? Now, in terms of the morphological structure of fungi, if they are multicellular fungi, they basically have filaments, and those filaments are called hyphae, okay? So in other words, if you are a multicellular fungus, then you basically have hyphae, filaments. Now these hyphae can come in two forms, aseptate or septate. Now aseptate means, let's start with this thing. Septate, hyphae. It means you have cross walls in the hyphae. Okay, you're separating the hyphae into individual cells. See that? These cross walls are called septum. Now in the aseptate or non-septate, either way, same difference, right? Aseptate, non-septate means without the cross walls. Do you see the cross walls there? No. You see nuclei, yes, but no cross walls. Tabby? So septate means they have cross walls in the filament. So all this is a filament, that's a hyphae. In septate, they have divisions or cross walls separating out the individual cells. So here's one nucleus, right? One cell. One nucleus, one cell. This guy's one cell, that guy's one cell. So those divisions divide the cells out. Now in aseptate or non-septate, okay, there are no divisions. So you have all these nuclei, right? But they're kind of just there together. There's no individual cells there. Got it? Now this form is also called cenocytic. Remember we talked about cenocytes earlier, and I said you will see that again? Cenocyte is basically a cell that undergoes multiple cell divisions without what? Cytokinesis? It's the same thing with this. So if you see that kind of hyphae, it's also called cenocytic, multinucleate. Now, you guys have fungi, like yeast, okay? They don't really make hyphae. They can make pseudohyphae. In other words, they can make pseudohyphae if they're doing budding and the buds never separate out. Make sense? So they do budding, but the buds stick together. That's pseudohyphae in yeast. And some fungi have dimorphic forms, meaning they have a yeast-like form and they have a mold-like form. So that's a dimorphic fungus. They go from one to another. Usually, if they do that, it's usually temperature related. Okay? So if they go from a yeast form, unicellular, to a multicellular mold form, it's usually based on temperature. In terms of nutrition, they eat by absorption.